very much, Eve. It's really a pleasure to be with you. I had an experience similar to Eve's when I started in this industry about 30 years ago. The mayor of Houston appointed a guy to be the czar over housing and revitalization, and I was asked to be his right-hand man. I was a dumb lawyer and an English major one of the reasons I was an English major was because I tried to avoid math. And then I ended up being assigned to this gentleman who was a multimillionaire real estate developer and a bona fide real estate finance genius who could whip through numbers faster than any human I've ever seen. I recall being in his office one day and he was looking at a very complex spreadsheet on a housing deal, which I could not follow. And at one point he said, "The numbers don't tie, Neil, they don't tie." And I'm thinking, are they supposed to tie? What does he mean? What numbers don't tie? It was kind of mystery to me. I was not a real estate finance guy, but I appreciated learning from him. So for about 5 years, I sat at his elbow and watched him put together some really complex deals, and I learned a lot. But I will tell you, like Eve said, I got thrown into this sea of acronyms and technical jargon that frankly went way over my head. And what I'm trying to present to you today are things that I wish somebody had taught me in giving me a baseline foundation 29 years ago or 28 years ago when I started in this industry. There are really three major public housing or affordable housing programs, I should say, that are the most relevant for what we do. The first is the public housing program. Second is the housing choice voucher or voucher program. And the third is the low-income housing tax credit program. So we're going to cover all three of those, but we're going to do so from a perspective that will help us to see why these things are important and how they work. But I'm not going to teach this from the perspective of a CPA or a lawyer who is teaching CPAs and lawyers who are already deeply into this world. So let's start with public housing. This was really the first effort of the federal government to subsidize rental housing in the U.S. It had an interesting history and a very troubled history, frankly. There were a lot of fits and starts and a lot of successes and failures in the development of public housing in the United States of America. Currently, there are about 1.1 million housing units in the U.S. 2.2 million people live in those homes. In the way the public housing program worked is very different from how we develop affordable housing today. In this model, the government funded the program, and then the government funded housing authorities that were created all over the United States of America. This was really a New Deal program to respond to the challenges of the Great Depression. And in this model, the government designs, develops, owns, constructs, and manages the apartments. And sometimes they did a good job, and sometimes they didn't do a good job. This is a little bit of history. This is a development called Techwood Homes. It was built in 1936, the first public housing development in the United States of America. Initially, this was a jobs program and slums clearing effort. As I mentioned, the history of public housing hasn't always been positive. In this case, hundreds of African American families were evicted from their homes to make way for the development of a 604-unit, whites-only segregated housing project. Here's a picture of Techwood Homes and a family living there. This was such a big deal that FDR actually spoke at Techwood Homes. Similar segregation as public housing development persisted up through the 1960s in the United States of America. There were a few milestones that are of note. In 1968, the Fair Housing Act was passed, which meant that public housing could no longer be used as a tool for advancing segregation. Then in 1974, President Richard Nixon instituted a moratorium on public housing development. Since then, there has been no significant expansion of the public housing program. Federally funded multifamily affordable housing development shifted to a voucher program in around 1974. One of the things that you will find in the affordable housing world is that people often refer to all affordable housing as public housing. It's not technically correct. And part of what is problematic about that is that a lot of the problems that developed in public housing don't exist in the housing that we develop today. And so there's a lot of stigma and negative perceptions, whether that's right or wrong, associated with the public housing program. So it's good to not focus on public housing when we're trying to tell a neighborhood about a low-income housing tax credit development, for example. So now you know a little bit about the beginning and the history of public housing. In the next video, we're going to talk about some of the challenges.